The first time the mountain shook, the villagers ran. They clutched their children and their goats, their copper pots and their ancestral tablets, and they fled downhill as though the sky itself were cracking open. Only the old tea-seller Madiring remained by the stone bridge, her kettle still steaming above a ring of coals. Someone shouted at her to follow, but she merely lifted her eyes toward the ridge where the pine trees bent like penitent monks, and she answered, "The earth is just turning over in its sleep. When it wakes, it will tell us why." That was the day the river changed its course, the day the temple bell rolled into the gorge, the day the farmer's son lost his right hand to a falling cedar. Years later, that same boy, now a man with a calloused stump and a brush held between forearm and cheek, would paint murals that covered every wall of the rebuilt monastery, murals that travelers still describe as sorrow-breathing light. Madiring's kettle has long gone cold, yet the echo of her words continues to rise from every stone that shifted that morning. We call such mornings disasters, but the mountain calls them invitations. Buddhism simply records the RSVP. Yes, I will attend. Yes, I will allow the fire to burn away what I no longer need. Yes, I will sit in the ashes until I understand the color of flame. Nothing in this turning world arrives by accident. The leaf that lands in your open notebook during an autumn walk is not a random scrap of chlorophyll. It is the tree's letter to you, signed in vermilion ink. The lover who leaves at dawn, folding his absence into the sleeve of your favorite coat, is not a cruel accident, but a courier bearing sealed orders from your future self. The illness that hollows your chest is not an enemy ambush. It is a messenger whose language is fever and whose alphabet is tremor. Buddhism asks us to bow to the messenger, to read the letter aloud, to taste the salt on the envelope's seal. Only then do we learn that the salt is not meant to sting forever. It is meant to preserve what is most precious until we are ready to eat of it and remember. Consider the story again, not as parable, but as lived geography. The disciple who carries the handful of salt to the master is not merely a seeker. He is every one of us on the morning the diagnosis arrives. The pink slip flutters onto the desk, or the text message simply says, "We need to talk." He arrives already brimming with narrative, rehearsing the unfairness of the world like a bitter anthem. His palm hurts where the salt crystals bite into the skin, but he refuses to open the hand because clenching is the only power he believes he still possesses. The master does not lecture. Instead, he points to the glass of water waiting on the low lacquered table. The disciple drops the salt. One sip and his face puckers. The story he has carried curdles on his tongue. Then the slow walk to the lake, the same handful, now slightly diminished, slightly dissolved, released into the wide, indifferent blue. When he kneels to drink, the water tastes like morning mist, like the possibility of another name for sorrow. The master smiles, not because the problem has been solved, but because the container has grown larger than the wound. This is the hidden architecture of every grief. It is always smaller than the awareness that eventually surrounds it. The moment we realize this, the choreography shifts. Instead of frantically stacking sandbags against the flood, we become the river itself, widening in places, deepening in others, learning the art of embracing banks that once felt like prisons. Buddhism calls this widening the cultivation of spacious mind, but even those syllables can feel like jargon when the rent is overdue, the biopsy report is still sealed, and the children are asking why mommy is crying in the kitchen again. So let us trade jargon for image. Imagine a single drop of ink released into a teacup. The darkness spreads until the tea looks ruined. Now, imagine that same drop released into the ocean. It vanishes so utterly that even the ink forgets it was ever separate. The practice is not to dilute the pain, but to recognize that we were never merely a teacup. We were always the entire ocean dreaming of porcelain. How, then, Do we remember the ocean on the nights when the porcelain cracks? We begin by renaming the experience. Instead of shouting, "Why is this happening to me?" a question that locks the jaw in a snarl, we whisper, "What is this teaching me?" The shift from accusation to curiosity is microscopic, yet entire universes pivot on that syllabic hinge. Curiosity loosens the fist. Curiosity admits the possibility that the stranger at the door is not death disguised as heartbreak, but life disguised as revolution. Curiosity allows the breath to descend all the way to the belly, where the real decisions are made, decisions about whether we will metabolize the salt or allow it to calcify into bitterness. Let us linger for a moment in that belly breath, because it is there that transformation begins. When we inhale past the collarbone, past the anxious flutter at the sternum, down past the solar plexus where shame likes to crouch, we arrive at the dantian, the sea of Q. Here the diaphragm spreads like a pair of dark wings, and the salt dissolves into something the blood can carry. Buddhism teaches that the body itself is a sangha, an assembly of beings, each cell reciting its own sutra of impermanence. When we bring awareness to the breath, we become the translator, listening as the liver confesses its anger, the kidneys whisper their fear, the heart admits its longing to be held like a frightened child. Every organ is a monk at the bedside of our becoming, chanting, "Change is safe. Let go, let go." The night I buried my father, the moon was a thin blade slicing open the belly of the sky. My brothers and I took turns shoveling the red clay, each thud of earth on wood, a dull punctuation mark in a language we had never studied. Afterward, we sat on the edge of the fresh mound, passing a thermos of oolong back and forth, steam rising like the ghost of every conversation we had postponed. No one spoke until the youngest, who had only seen 16 winters, asked, "What do we do with the empty chair?" I heard myself answer, "We let the empty teach us how to sit differently." I didn't know where the words came from. They tasted like someone else's wisdom, yet even as I spoke them, I felt the container widen. My grief did not disappear, but it changed its name from hole to doorway. Years later, when the same boy, now a man with 2 daughters of his own, stood at my mother's grave, he told me that the sentence had become a lantern he carried into every darkness. This is how Dharma travels, one stunned heart speaking to another, across the hush of turned soil. We are tempted to believe that such transformations are rare, reserved for the elect, or the especially enlightened. Buddhism insists otherwise. It whispers that every moment is seeded with awakening. Even the moment when the toast burns, the traffic light stalls, the email arrives in ALL caps. The difference lies in whether we pause long enough to taste the seed. Consider the ordinary miracle of waking at 3:17 a.m. with the heart jackhammering after a dream of falling. The mind races to interpret. Is this a premonition of financial collapse? An undiagnosed arrhythmia? The memory of a shame that happened in 3rd grade? While the mind spins, the body is already metabolizing the adrenaline, the breath already slowing of its own accord. If we can simply stay with the sensation, the quiver in the sternum, the damp at the temples, without stapling a story to it, we discover that fear is not a solid but a liquid. It rises, crests and falls away, leaving behind a silence so complete it hums. That humming is the sound of the container expanding without our permission. Of course, permission is precisely what we think we need. We draft elaborate contracts with destiny. I will consent to pain provided it ends by Friday. I will accept loss as long as I receive a better job within 6 months. I will surrender control, but only if the universe promises to keep my children safe. Buddhism smiles at these clauses, the way a river smiles at a child's paper boat, gently, without mockery, even as the current swallows the vessel. The truth is that life honors a deeper contract, one written in a language older than Sanskrit or Mandarin. Its single clause reads, "You will change. Our choice is limited to how we meet that change with clenched fist or open palm. I remember interviewing an old woman in Kyoto who had survived the firebombing. She told me that the night the city burned, she was 9 years old, carrying her infant brother on her back, while her mother dragged a cart of futon. At one point the heat became so fierce that the asphalt softened beneath their getter. Her mother whispered, "Step lightly. The street is learning to be a river." Decades later, when the woman's only son died in a car accident, she stood at the intersection where the wreck occurred and said aloud to the empty air, "Step lightly. The street is still learning to be a river." She did not mean that the loss was trivial. She meant that the instruction remained the same. Suffering, she taught me, is neither curse nor curriculum. It is choreography. The music changes tempo, but the dance is always to learn how to move without breaking the fragile music inside us. To move without breaking requires that we revise our relationship with chaos. Most of us treat chaos as a vandal, spray painting obscenities across the neat mural of our plans. Buddhism suggests that chaos is actually an artist, albeit one who works in unfamiliar pigments: grief gray, uncertainty umber, midnight blue. When we let those colors touch the canvas of our lives, they reveal shapes we did not know we needed. Consider the Japanese art of kintsugi, which mends shattered pottery with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. The philosophy is simple. The break is not a blemish to disguise, it is a vein of light to celebrate. The bowl becomes more valuable, not in spite of its fractures, but because it has surrendered to them. Our lives are no different. Every disappointment, betrayal, or diagnosis is a crack through which the luminous can enter, if we stop trying to hide the seams. Yet how do we practice this in the marketplace of daily obligations where rent, deadlines, and dental appointments demand our attention? We begin by lowering the bar for what counts as practice. A single conscious breath, while waiting for the elevator, is practice. Noticing the exact shade of rust on the fire escape railing is practice. Allowing the heart to ache without rushing to anesthesia is practice. The Buddha did not attain enlightenment by performing heroic feats. He sat beneath a tree and paid attention to the breath for 49 days. Most of us cannot spare 49 days, but we can spare 49 seconds. In those seconds we remember that the mind is like tofu. It takes the flavor of whatever it's soaked in, let it soak in spaciousness, and even the most ordinary moment becomes edible. Spaciousness is not a luxury, it is a necessity, especially when life narrows to the point of a needle. When my friend Lila was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, she told me that the first thing she lost was the future. Every plan, vacations, retirement, the simple assumption that she would watch her granddaughter graduate evaporated overnight. Yet in the vacuum left by the future, she discovered an almost unbearably vivid present. The smell of toast became a cathedral. The sound of rain on the hospital window became a lullaby composed specifically for her marrow. One afternoon she texted me, "Today the pain is a wolf pacing the perimeter. I cannot make it leave, but I have learned to sit by the fire without staring at the door." She died 18 months later. Yet during that time she painted 27 watercolors, learned to play the ukulele, and taught half the oncology ward how to breathe through nausea. The wolf never left, but the fire grew large enough to include it. This is the real alchemy, not the elimination of pain, but the expansion of context, until pain becomes one guest at a table where joy, curiosity, and wonder are also seated. Buddhism calls this the middle way, but the phrase is misleading if it suggests a lukewarm compromise. The middle way is actually a dynamic balance, like surfing the crest of a wave that perpetually dissolves and reforms. One moment the surfer is flooded with exhilaration, the next, terror. Both sensations are part of the same water. The skill lies in staying upright long enough to taste the salt on both cheeks. To stay upright, We need stories that carry more oxygen than the ones we inherited. The culture teaches us to narrate our lives as a series of problems to solve. How do I get thinner, richer, more secure, more loved? Buddhism offers a counter-narrative. Life is not a problem to solve, but a mystery to inhabit. The difference is seismic. When life is a problem, failure is catastrophe. When life is a mystery, failure is simply the next clue. Every rejection letter, every biopsy result, every unanswered text becomes a rune whose meaning is revealed only when we stop demanding that it say something else. I think of the graffiti I once saw on a crumbling wall in Lisbon. I sought the city, but the city was seeking me. The same is true of every sorrow we tuck into our pockets like contraband. We think we are carrying it, but it is carrying us toward the version of ourselves that is large enough to hold it. This is why the butterfly must struggle to free itself from the cocoon. The effort forces fluid from its body into the wings. Without the struggle, the wings remain stunted, decorative but useless. We too need the pressure of constriction to pump possibility into the fibers of our becoming. Yet the cocoon is not heroic. It is dark, sticky and claustrophobic. Inside, the caterpillar literally digests itself, releasing enzymes that dissolve every cell until it becomes soup. Only then do imaginal cells, clusters of pure potential, begin to dream the blueprint of wings. The process is indistinguishable from death. This is why so many spiritual traditions speak of the dark night. It is not a night that needs to be fixed with better flashlights. It is a night that needs to be inhabited until the stars feel personal. To rush the process is to emerge with wings too weak to fly, as the disciple discovered when he tried to help the butterfly by slicing open its cocoon. Inhabiting the dark night requires a new kind of listening. Most of us listen for answers. Why did this happen? What should I do? Buddhism invites us to listen for presence. What is alive here? What is tender? What is trying to be born? These are not questions that yield tidy resolutions. They are questions that open doors. One afternoon, while sitting with my own fear of financial instability, I suddenly heard the whisper, "What if lack is not a hole but a hollowing?" The sentence made no logical sense, yet it loosened something in my chest. A week later, an unexpected commission arrived, small but enough to buy groceries and remember that the universe has pockets I have never checked. The commission did not solve the larger anxiety, but it revealed that anxiety itself was a form of claustrophobia, a refusal to believe that space could open in directions I had not mapped. This is the deeper meaning of Dharma, not a cosmic vending machine dispensing rewards for good behavior, but an invisible geometry of interconnection where every shift in one quadrant reverberates throughout the whole. When we align ourselves with this geometry, when we stop insisting on straight lines in a fractal universe, miracles cease to be anomalies and become the natural grammar of flow. The job we lose makes room for the skill we never monetized. The relationship that ends returns us to the friendship we neglected. The illness that slows us down introduces us to the neighbor who becomes the witness we never knew we needed. Of course, this perspective is easy to romanticize from a distance. Close up, it looks like snot, tears, and sleepless nights. The trick is to keep the aperture wide, even while the heart contracts. One practical way is to conduct what I call micro-obituaries. Each night before sleep, I write 3 things that died that day. The illusion that my parents will live forever, the hope that tomorrow's meeting will go smoothly, the belief that I can finish the novel by December. Writing these tiny deaths loosens their grip. In the space they vacate, something else is born, sometimes a poem, sometimes a dream, sometimes simply the ability to sleep without rehearsing tomorrow's battles. Micro-obituaries are part of a larger discipline of relinquishment. Relinquishment is not renunciation in the ascetic sense. It is the gentle art of setting down what no longer serves. We set down the need to be the smartest person in the room. We set down the hope that love will arrive in the exact package we ordered. We set down the fantasy that we can live without loss. Each relinquishment is a small death, but it is also a small liberation. The hands that were full of yesterday's clutter are now free to receive today's unexpected gift. Sometimes the gift arrives disguised as inconvenience. The train is delayed, and we miss the interview. Weeks later, we learn that the company folded. The traffic jam makes us late for the concert, but in the lobby we bump into an old friend who tells us about the residency program that becomes the next chapter of our life. Buddhism calls this dependent origination, the recognition that every event is the culmination of infinite causes stretching back to the birth of stars. To trace any single thread is to discover that the tapestry has no edge. This is why the Buddha laughed when asked to explain the cause of suffering. The laughter was not mockery, but delight at the impossibility of isolating any one strand. To live in the awareness of infinite strands is to become porous. Porousness is the opposite of paralysis. It is the capacity to be penetrated by beauty without drowning in it, to be wounded by sorrow without freezing into bitterness. I once watched a street musician in Krakow play Chopin on a battered accordion. Midway through the prelude, a pigeon landed on his shoulder and stayed until the final note. No one clapped. The moment was too intimate for applause. Later I asked the musician how he had trained the bird. He shrugged. I didn't. I just stopped shooing them away. This is the whole secret. We stop shooing. We allow the unexpected to perch on the shoulder of our carefully rehearsed song. Yet even porousness has its seasons. There are times to open the windows and times to draw the curtains. Buddhism honors cycles. It does not demand that we be perpetually available to every wind. After a major loss, the nervous system needs to contract. In those periods, the practice becomes not expansion, but tenderness. We curl into the smallest unit of safety, a blanket, a cup of tea, a single syllable of mantra repeated like a lullaby. The cocoon is not a failure of courage, it is a phase of gestation. The mistake is to build a permanent residence there. Emergence from the cocoon is rarely dramatic. More often it is a slow uncurling, like the first fern of spring nosing through the mulch. One day we notice that the thought of the beloved no longer collapses the lungs. The memory of the mistake no longer ignites shame. The fear of the future no longer hijacks the present. These are not achievements but ripenings. We did not force the ripening. We simply stopped interfering with it. This is the meaning of Wu Wei, not doing nothing, but doing nothing extra. The gardener does not yank the seedling to make it grow faster. She waters when the soil is dry, weeds when the thistles rise, and otherwise trusts the intelligence of dirt. Trust is the final frontier. We will tolerate uncertainty in small doses, but life eventually serves a banquet of it. The marriage ends, the savings evaporate, the body refuses to obey. In those moments, trust feels like betrayal. How can we trust a universe that allows such cruelty? Buddhism reframes the question, how can we distrust a universe that includes not only cruelty, but also the capacity to witness cruelty with compassion? The eye that weeps is part of the same organism that inflicts the wound. This is not blame but recognition. When we see that we are both victim and perpetrator, both wound and medicine, the binary collapses. What remains is a field of responsibility where accountability and forgiveness grow like twin vines around the same trellis. In that field, even death becomes a teacher rather than an enemy. I sat with my grandmother as she died at home, her bedroom transformed into a makeshift hospice. On the final afternoon, she opened her eyes and asked for a mirror. Holding it up, she studied her reflection with the same curiosity she once reserved for butterflies. So this is how it ends, she said, not with despair but with wonder. Then she turned the mirror toward me so that our faces overlapped. her wrinkles like rivers on my younger map. "Remember," she whispered, "the mirror is not cruel, it only shows what is." She died that night, but the sentence has become a koan I carry like a pebble in the shoe. Whenever I resent the reflection of my body, my choices, my life, I hear her voice: "The mirror is not cruel, it only shows what is." The cruelty is in the refusal to look. Looking is the first act of love. When we look at our own pain without flinching, we begin to see the pain of others with clarity rather than projection. The boss who humiliates becomes the child who was humiliated. The partner who abandons becomes the adolescent who was abandoned. The politician who betrays becomes the elder who was betrayed. This is not excuse-making, it is X-ray vision. Once we see the fracture, we can address the fracture instead of railing at the symptom. Buddhism calls this the cultivation of bodhicitta, the awakened heart that recognizes into being. My liberation is bound up with yours. My healing is incomplete until you are healed. This recognition changes the way we walk through the world. Every interaction becomes an altar. The barista who hands over the coffee is not a service provider, but a co-conspirator in the conspiracy of wakefulness. The stranger who cuts us off in traffic is not a villain, but a reminder to exhale. The friend who disappoints is not a traitor, but a mirror reflecting the parts of ourselves we have disowned. To live this way is to become a cartographer of invisible threads, mapping the ways our joys and sorrows braid into the communal braid. Yet even cartographers get lost. The path to awakening is not linear. It spirals, doubles back, disappears into fog. Some days we feel expansive, certain that every loss has been tuition for the school of compassion. Other days we wake up raw, convinced that nothing has meaning, and the universe is a prankster. Buddhism does not ask us to choose between these moods. It asks us to hold them both like two wings of the same bird. The wing of despair keeps us honest. The wing of hope keeps us moving. Flight happens in the tension between. Eventually we realize that the spiral is not a detour, but the destination. Every revolution around the center polishes the lens through which we view the center. What once looked like chaos begins to resemble a mandala, intricate, purposeful, ephemeral. The sand-painting monks of Tibet spend days creating elaborate designs, grain by grain, then sweep them into a river. The point is not permanence, but participation. We are here to add our own handful of colored sand, to trust that the pattern is bigger than our individual pixel, and to release our contribution when the time comes. The time always comes. Jobs dissolve, relationships reconfigure, bodies return to soil. The question is not whether we will lose everything. We will. The question is whether we will meet the loss with clenched fist or open palm. The open palm is the gesture of the lotus, which blooms in muddy water without clinging to the mud. The mud is necessary. Without it, the lotus has no nutrients. But the bloom itself is pure, untouched by the muck from which it rises. This is not transcendence through denial, but transformation through integration. The mud and the bloom are not separate. They are phases of the same becoming. As I write this, a storm is moving in from the west. The sky has turned the color of wet slate, and the first fat drops are tapping at the window like impatient messengers. Somewhere in this city a child is being born. Someone is taking their last breath. A couple is signing divorce papers. Two strangers are exchanging phone numbers. All of it is happening at once, the way every note of a symphony exists simultaneously, even though we hear them sequentially. The storm does not ask permission, and neither does grace. Our task is to meet both with equal curiosity, to let the rain soak us until we remember that we are not separate from the weather, but made of it. The Japanese word yukio originally meant the floating world, the realm of transient pleasures, kabuki, cherry blossoms, moonlit sake. Over time it evolved to include sorrow, recognizing that impermanence flavors both joy and grief. To live in Ukiyo is to surf the surface of the wave while knowing the depths beneath are fathomless. This is not superficiality but profound acceptance. We dance precisely because the music will end. We love precisely because the beloved will leave. Every kiss is seasoned with mortality. Every sunrise is a rehearsal for the day it will not rise. And yet, the sun continues to rise. Each morning it paints the sky with hues that have no name, and each morning we are given another chance to practice. Practice does not mean perfection. It means presence. Presence does not mean paralysis. It means participation. Participation does not mean control. It means cooperation with the forces that create and destroy galaxies inside a single heartbeat. So let us return to the beginning. The boy who lost his hand, the woman who lost her future, the monk who lost his monastery to fire. Each of them discovered that loss is not subtraction, but revelation. The boy learned to paint with the arm that remained. The woman learned to live in the day that remained. The monk learned to teach in the ruin that remained. None of them would have chosen their particular curriculum, yet all of them graduated into a wisdom that could not have been conferred by comfort. This is the hidden purpose of suffering, to graduate us from the narrow classroom of the self into the vast auditorium of interbeing. The diploma is not a certificate of enlightenment, but the capacity to say, without bitterness, "I would not trade this journey for any other." Such a statement is not resignation but recognition, the recognition that every scar is a signature, every tear a baptism, every ending a beginning wearing a mask. If you are reading this in the aftermath of your own earthquake, whether the ground shook beneath your feet or only inside your chest, know that the aftershocks are evidence of settling, not destruction. The landscape is rearranging itself to accommodate the new river. Your task is not to dam the river, but to learn its banks, to plant what will grow in the changed soil, to build bridges where none existed before. The old maps are obsolete. The new ones will be drawn by the footsteps you are about to take. Take them barefoot when possible. Feel the grit between your toes, the reminder that the earth is still here, still solid, still willing to hold your weight. Take them slowly when necessary. Speed is not a virtue, presence is. Take them in company when you can. The myth of solitary enlightenment is just that. A myth. Even the Buddha sat under a tree supported by the shade, the breath, the memory of every hand that had ever fed him. And when you fall, as you will fall forward, let the ground catch you with the same tenderness it showed the seed that became the oak. The ground is not your enemy. It is the original mother, the one who never stopped loving you even when you forgot to call. Lie there for a moment and listen. The earth is always humming a lullaby whose lyric is welcome home. Eventually you will rise. You will brush the dirt from your knees and notice that it sparkles. Mica, quartz, the pulverized bones of ancient mountains. You will realize that everything you thought you lost is still here, just rearranged. The love has become memory. The memory has become wisdom. The wisdom has become the quiet strength that allows you to stand next to someone else who is trembling and say, without lying, I know, and you will rise. This is how the world changes. One wound, one witness, one widening at a time. The mountain that shook all those years ago is still standing, but it is not the same mountain. The villagers who ran have returned and built new homes with windows facing the sunrise. The boy who lost his hand now teaches others to paint with their mouths, their feet, their hearts. The tea seller's kettle has been reforged. It sits in the village square, filled each morning with water that remembers the storm. Every cup poured from it carries the faintest taste of salt, not enough to sting, just enough to remind. The reminder is this: you are not broken. You are becoming. The becoming is not linear. It is spiraling. The spiral is not a trap. It is a dance. The dance is not solitary. It is the choreography of all beings waking together. So when the next wave comes, because it will, do not brace against it. Dive. The water is cold, yes, but it is also alive, and it has been waiting for you to remember that you too are mostly water. In the depths you will find that the salt has not disappeared. It has been absorbed into the greater body where it seasons rather than scalds. You will taste it on your lips when you surface, and the taste will be both bitter and sweet. Bitter with every loss, sweet with the knowledge that loss is the price of depth. Drink deeply. The ocean is not trying to drown you, it is trying to teach you how to swim. And swim you will. Not away from the waves but into them. Not with perfect form but with growing trust that the water will hold you, that your limbs remember rhythms older than fear, that every stroke is an answer to the question you forgot you asked. The question was never, why is this happening to me? The question was always, how wide can I become? The answer is, as wide as the lake that once tasted bitter and now tastes like morning mist, like the possibility of another name for sorrow. That name is love. Always in the end, it is love. Not the sentimental love of greeting cards, but the fierce love that refuses to look away. The love that stands in the ruins and says, I will plant tomatoes here. The love that greets the wolf at the door with a bowl of soup and a question, are you hungry for meat or for belonging? The wolf is always hungry for belonging, so feed it, sit with it until it curls at your feet and falls asleep, twitching with dreams of flight. When it wakes, it will be a dog. When it dreams, it will be a bird. When it soars, it will remember that it was once a wolf, once a wound, once a question you were brave enough to ask. And the circle will complete itself, not as closure but as an opening, a spiral returning to the same point, but at a higher turn, where the view is wider, the air thinner, the perspective clearer. From that height, you will see that the path was never a path but a pattern, never straight but fractal, never leading somewhere but always arriving. You will see that every step was a prayer, every stumble a teaching, every pause a benediction. You will see that the hidden purpose of suffering was never hidden at all. It was simply waiting for eyes willing to see, ears willing to hear, a heart willing to break open rather than apart. And in that breaking open, you will recognize the face you have been seeking all along. It is your own face, older, softer, etched with the hieroglyphs of every tear, every laugh, every moment you said yes to the fire. The face will smile, not because the story has ended, but because it has finally been understood as a love story, always a love story, even when it dressed in the costume of tragedy. The kettle whistles, the storm passes, the river finds its new bed, the salt dissolves, the lotus blooms, the butterfly opens its wings, the monk rings the bell, the child is born, the elder dies, the circle turns, and you, beautiful, broken whole, are already part of it, already home, already on your way to becoming what you have always been. The ocean dreaming, it is a drop. The drop dreaming, it is the ocean, the salt and the water, the mud and the lotus, the wound and the light that enters through it. Take the next step. It is enough. It has always been enough.